Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Moving Back or Moving Forward, Rethinking Return Migration, hosted by the Premium EU project. My name is Katrine Ebbesen. I'm Senior Communications Advisor at Nordregio and Head of Communications for Premium, and I'll be guiding you through the webinar today. I'm a migrant from Denmark myself, living in Stockholm, Sweden for the past 2.5 years. I've also lived in Australia, as you can hear from my accent, and I would like to hear where you're currently tuning in from in the audience. Please let us know in the chat where you're from, which region or country, and if you're a migrant too, where you're originally from. We would love to hear that. What is a return migrant? The assumption is sometimes that we're talking about deportation or refugees returning post-crisis. But just like the theme of migration, we're looking at returnees from a much broader perspective in this project. Return migration is more than just numbers in a demographic report. It's also about how regions interpret these movements and the stories they tell about themselves. Do returnees come back because they failed abroad or because they bring skills, networks, and perspectives with them that can revitalize their communities? These are one of the assumptions we'll be testing today. You'll hear insights from our case study researchers in Poland, Turkey, and Austria, and we'll open the floor for debate and questions. But let's get a look at the agenda. And great to see you all tuning in with your origins. That's great. See a lot of answers coming. So here's the agenda today. As you can see, we have 3 presentations from members of our premium team, and followed by a short debate and Q&A. We'll try to get as many questions in there from you as possible. And on that note, please don't hesitate with your questions. My lovely communications colleague at Premium, Sarah Melanda, is online helping me moderate the chat today. And yeah, also please have any questions you have to our presenters, write those as well, and they'll also be active in the chat. But before we move to the first presentation, and I will introduce the speakers as we go, so that will be coming, please take a moment to answer our first poll. Which statement best reflects how return migration is commonly viewed in your region or country? People only move back when they fail abroad. If someone comes back, they will stay. People return because of homesickness, or return migration is too random to plan for. And I see some answers coming in quickly. That's great. Thank you very much for your answers and being active already. Good, and I can see here it's definitely the last 2 that are the highest here. People return because of homesickness, and return migration is too random to plan for, which is why it's good that we have this kind of project to hopefully tackle that, because they confirm the goal of today, which is to challenge common assumptions and uncover smarter ways to think about migration in regional policy, how actually to plan for something that can seem rather random. So thank you for your answers. We're going to start by hearing about the concept of migration capital, the skills, networks, and experiences returnees bring home, but that often go unrecognized. Our first speaker, Dr. Michal Wanke from Krakow University of Economics, will challenge policy frameworks that fail to treat returnees as agents of regional renewal. So I will give it over to you, Michal. You have a bit more time, as I was a bit quicker than I thought. Over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I'm Katrine. Hello, everyone. It would be lovely to get the slides. Oh, yeah, they're coming. And thanks for the introduction.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Yep, so I'm going to talk about the mobility capital framed in a slightly different way than traditionally in migration studies. I will try to keep it like non-academic or less academic than we typically do at the conferences. But I want to highlight the, let's say, benefits of return migration for Polish vulnerable regions. And this is the subject of the whole project, as you probably know, following the Premium EU. And I will try to answer the question, what benefits are there hidden in the mobility capital? Speaking about the vulnerable regions, okay, the slides are changing. And we in Poland, we worked in the four corners of the country. So West Pomeranian, in Podlaskie, in Subcarpathian, and Opolskie. We picked smaller sections of these regions for their high out-migration in the first place, but often also for very different socioeconomic indicators that, let's say, predicted their vulnerability or simply disadvantages over there in the regions. So we worked, let's say, in all four corners of Poland for many different reasons. Sometimes these are historical migration paths or trajectories, sometimes the proximity of the west of Europe, and so on and so forth. First of all, I want to illustrate how this vulnerability, let's say, looks like on the micro level of migrant experience. So the decisions to leave, they were very similar across the cases that we had. Typically, it was, like unemployment, no perspectives. And let's go through this one from the West Pomeranian. There was a lot of unemployment in the town back then. It was really hard to find a job. Some of our friends had already started going abroad. They helped open up the path for him, for the husband of the person here, and suggested he should join them. And for the same reason, I had finished my studies. I had worked in shop throughout university, earning minimum wage. There weren't really any opportunities here in the town, no internships, no real prospects in my field. So we decided to leave. So it's very often like this, and this is how the vulnerability of the regions that we worked in looks like from the perspective of this woman who returned from the UK when we interviewed her last year. Very similar stories in these different regions, highlighted or underpinned by very, very high unemployment and structural lack of adjustments of the qualifications, skills with the aspirations of people who lived there. So simply they left, typically following some networks and paths of their friends or family members. But we're interested in the contributions of these folks who left 20, 15, even 10 years ago, what they can bring to the region now once they are coming back. And this is what we focused on when we interviewed them. So in theory, in literature, and also in our study, what can be brought, let's say, back to the region of the origin would be obviously the remittances and investments. So people go out there to earn money and send it back home. Many of these migration projects, let's say, were based on investment in housing, so simply building their own homes back home throughout the years. So in this most substantial, but also very basic way, the money comes back with people who out-migrated and then who would be coming back. But also they bring what we call social remittances, what Claudius would be able to tell us probably more later in the discussion, because he's an expert on remittances and social remittances in here. So some kind of social innovations, new ideas and changes of mindsets really that can be brought back. Very often we observed different gender ideas of gender roles, different ideas about one's health and taking care of it, and different ideas of ecological consciousness, air quality, for example, starting to care about this kind of thing. So these are different attitudes that you remit back to your community. Also, the mobility capitals that I will focus on today. So throughout the migration process and through the migration process, you gain some sort of generic skills because it takes certain skills, competences, but also mindsets to migrate in the first place. And then in the process, you have to learn how to, find accommodation, find job, communicate to people who are different than you, to what you were used to, and so on and so forth. I will come back to this point in a moment. You can also bring social capital, so you can meet people on your journey, and you can convert it in a way in something meaningful. For example, as your co-workers for the business that you would set up coming back. But there are different ways that return migrants can contribute to the region. But why they are coming back? Let's have a look at a very typical quotation from the Polish migrants coming back, in this case from the Netherlands, to one of the regions, Polskie in the south west of Poland. Let's read it out. So later, our daughter was born. When it was time for her to start preschool, we had to decide either Poland or staying there permanently, right? We did not want to cause too much confusion in her mind. And in the end, we realized that it was not really a country that felt friendly to us. So my wife came back, and within a year and a half, the house was built, and our daughter started preschool here back in Poland. So this is a migrant, not exactly returned migrant, because he returned and turned into a shuttle migrant. So he's 3 weeks there, 3 weeks here, working this transnational life. But very often, these decisions to come back are based on something completely different to what the decision to leave, some sort of biographical moments in the lives of these folks. And now, when they are coming back, there is this burden of reintegration because, 15 years, 10 years, 20 years would pass and the place would change. I want you to focus on these or realize these fundamental issues here. The decision to migrate is due to unmet aspirations in the first place. So there was this labor market mismatch, no housing, no place to start a family. So people would go and try to earn money abroad. But the decision to return is due, as I highlighted, some biographically right time. So either the migration goals are met or children are born and they, need to go to school, preschool. Sometimes they go old enough that you can leave them and come back because your nostalgic reasons or to care for your elderly parents, as is very typical in Polish, let's say, nuclear family culture. Sometimes people return due to social issues. They don't like diversity. We had it as well a bit in our interviews. People would come in search of homogeneity back in Poland because they were tired of living in the highly complex societies of the west of Europe. So when the returnees, when migrants who return come back, they're not necessarily well fitted for the return. This is problematic. Hold this thought, but they have something that I will highlight today as a mobility capital. Have a look at this quotation. This is a young guy. He left a small town, first for a bigger city in Poland. He worked as a cook in a restaurant business, let's say, party life, very fast pace and all that. And then he decided to go to Iceland to focus on his craft. And he trained with very high quality restaurants over there. And then came back. And when I came back, he says, I decided I wanted to go back to my family home, back to my hometown, which is way smaller than any of the bigger cities in Poland. I just wanted to feel that calm again, the kind I also got a taste of in Iceland. So I told myself, I've got these skills and tools, and I'm not going to work for some restaurant. I felt like all that experience I've invested in shouldn't go to waste. So I said, all right, I'll just stick it out for 6 months working at a bakery. It was a winter then. And then I had this plan. I'd open my own food truck. He went on later. It was very successful. He went on, opened a restaurant with this open kitchen plan that I bumped into on my first day of the fieldwork, just searching reviews for the best restaurant in town. So imagine how this migration capital was turned into entrepreneurship, something really, really nice. So what is mobility capital that I'm talking about? This is something very often theorized as something that allows some people to migrate easily. So certain traditions in the family, or mindset, or ease to to just trespass your own boundaries or comfort zone. Migration capital is also something that you gain on the way, because you get the skills and knowledge and attitudes related to migration and migration infrastructures. What I mean is you understand how to exchange the money, how to travel internationally, how to send parcels and all that. So, this is a very specific knowledge not everyone in the country actually has. It is accumulated from the past mobility experiences. So you gain a lot of it, meeting new people, being in the situation, being on your own, having to solve your own problems, and so on and so forth. So it is typically studied as a potential for further movement. But I want to think a little bit today for 4 more minutes. What if it comes back to the region? Have a look at this quotation, another story. It's a female, a tiny little bit older than the other ones, from Opolski region. Again, she returned from Germany. So it was a similar story. They left just after they got married with the husband. There were zero perspectives for them to have their own, like home and work and whatever. Spent a lot of time in Germany, then decided to come back. And we were just thinking, like, it will work out somehow, right? Like, we'll find something for sure. And actually, the next day after we arrived, I checked the internet and saw that they were looking for someone with German language here. I applied right away. We set up an interview, and within a month, I started working. So the migration capital in this sense was simply the language, something very obvious. You acquire it by living in the country where you go. And I want to argue today that there are some unrecognized assets in returned migrants who come back resourceful and skillful very often. It just needs to be unveiled or simply noticed. So first of all, like in the example I just gave, you can have language skills, also communication skills. In one of the interviews, a person told me that because he was able to, he used to live in Norway, I think it was Norway, because he had contacts with Nordic people. Now in his current career back home, he knows when he's in the B2B business, right? So he has a lot of international contacts, and he knows how to talk to these types of persons, that types of person, and so on, right? So it's not only language per se, but also different, let's say, intercultural communication skills, but also some generic skills that are outcomes of migration as such, like openness to experience, right? This is what it takes to go in the first place. Some sort of self-efficiency. You have to take care of your own things, know networks that would support you. Agency, ability to act on your own and take your own decisions, actually. And a lot of entrepreneurship also obtained through migration. But there are also specific skills. So I've heard stories about, noticing how work is organized, in Germany, in the Netherlands, or how it is not very well organized in other countries that I'm not going to mention right now, right? So people would observe these kind of things. And this is not something you will put on your CV when coming back. You just noticed it, and only prompted by an interviewer, I thought Danish people, they did it this way, and it's really smart, and I thought we could adopt it here, right? These are very soft things. But also technologies, specific ways of doing things. We are talking about, sophisticated technologies, but also, about like simple workers who just figured out, okay, in Austria, they do it like this, and it was really faster, in the construction side. But also there are formal certifications and customer relations way of handling things. All of these are examples from our research. So people would come back with different, types of welding experience that is certified, and then they can go on and work in the welding field or in the healthcare, or when it comes to customer relations, very often the very focus on customer relations was the social innovation they would bring back. But also trusted networks. We've heard stories about businesses set up within the networks of trusted colleagues they would meet during their migration. But we are coming to the end. Let's have a look at the critical point. Another quotation from a migrant who came back very early, but her husband is still over there in Germany, and they are a transnational family in Podlaskie in northern and eastern Poland. So we came back with the thought that we were really coming back, and we had a bit of money saved. Honestly, we didn't really know what to invest that money in. And then I'm not sure, maybe that's when he started trying to set up some kind of business, but I think it didn't really work out. And there was always something came up. In the end, we were basically left with nothing, and he had to go abroad again. So sometimes there is this potential, in this case, very simple, this has got money, but it is going to waste. So my last point of the day is that it's not enough to let these returned migrants be. The mobility capital is quite invisible, I would argue, translucent, and it's difficult to recognize from the outside, but also from the inside. You sometimes don't realize what you know. It's not that as easy as knowing that you know how to speak German language. Very often, our informants were perceived to be in a limbo, especially those shuttle migrants, earn too much abroad, too little in the similar position here. But if they would look beyond the similar position, having these generic skills, they might be successful in the labor market. And very often having skills is not automatically transferable. So we had a worker who was a specialist in tunnel building in a flat Poland. Is very useless. But there are other skills that he would gain in the construction side that might be employed in Poland. Sometimes it's about policies of recognition that hinder skill transfer. We had a respondent, an informant from Sweden, who did a vocational school over there for elderly people, healthcare, a very much needed profession in Poland right now. But because of the bureaucratic procedures, she could not get it recognized and basically went to join the military. It's another emerging industry in Poland these days. So my point of the day is that the mobility capital of returned migrants, which comes in abundance, ought to be monitored for the benefit of the vulnerable regions. And I think this is where I will stop and get back to you and Katrine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michal. And right on time as well. I think I'll have one question for you, if you can keep it very short, a follow-up. We have a little bit more technical question than in the chat that I'll ask you to answer in the chat afterwards. But first of all, you mentioned a lot of these skills from the migrant perspective and all of these kind of all of these migration capital factors. But from the policy side, what blind spots, what's the biggest blind spot you think, in your opinion, there is to contributing to the underuse of migration capital? What's the biggest blind spot for them?
I have a very straightforward answer to this one. When we did research in these 4 regions, we also talked to the stakeholders, to the policymakers, to the local governors, and these are, keep in mind, very high out migration regions. So migration is traditional over there. Sometimes 10% of the population is out there, and they would very often just raise their eyebrows and like what we are supposed to do? Like, okay, they go, they come back, they're from here. What do you want from us, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't recognize the whole process at all, you won't dig into it. What could be done? How you can benefit? I'm not even mentioning this. This is beyond the scope of today's talk. That these governors, they don't even cater for their own folks. They need support. But today I argue, squeeze the potential out of them. Not even that. So that would be my first recommendation to notice it.
Thanks very much, Michal. And that's also exactly why we want to get that information out there, and we want to bridge that gap which is a big one, like you also mentioned. So thank you for that, Michal. And we will go straight forward to our second speaker. In Turkey, return migration is often shaped not by opportunity, but by obligation, especially for women. Dr. Hilal Arslan from Hacettepe University will talk about how gender roles and power dynamics within households influence return decisions, and what this means for regions trying to support reintegration. So I will hand it straight over to you, Hilal, and we'll help you share the slides from our end.
Thank you very much, and welcome to you all to this. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I will focus more on the gendered dimensions of the return migration today, and share our findings and observations that out of the field study that we conducted with my research colleagues Alanur Çaldin and Ayşe Abbasoglu Özgören and Sim. Yeah, but let me start with some definitions, data, and figures. So here, when we look at the data in the last 10 years, about who returned, like we focused on the return migrants from Austria and Netherlands for these two countries, and then we had to use the operational definitions since we have a data problem. So this is very common problem in migration research. So for the first generation, we use the operational definition like either Austrian or Netherlands citizen who was born in Turkey and lives currently in Turkey. And for the descendants, we use the operational definition like Turkish citizen who was born in Austria or Netherlands and lives currently in Turkey. So then when we look at just last 10 years, the official address-based register numbers, we see a steady increase in the number of the return migrants from both of these countries, especially for the descendants, and this is much more clear for the descendants from the Netherlands. And for the qualitative fieldwork, just go beyond the statistical figures and numbers in order to dig for more lived experiences of the return migrants. We focused on the lag-behind regions of the Turkey, like where these migrants to return in Turkey. So when we check the data, like we use two criteria: the share of return migrant groups to the original, the size of the cities, and also like when we select this the provinces, we look at the additional criteria like GDP per capita, socioeconomic development index, and well-being index for these regions. So the Yozgat and Karaman in our analysis was the two important cities, and also these are less developed regions of the country. And for the Turkish return migrants from Austria, we conducted our field survey in Yozgat, and for the Netherlands return migrants from Netherlands, we did our field study in the Karaman. So let me continue. Like, yeah, if you would need more information about the field study, that I can provide later for the details, like the profiles and methods that we use. But like Michal, I will focus more on the more interesting issues rather than talking more academic. So then the first thing first, like how do we understand the return migration? How do we conceptualize it? It was a interesting thing for us, because in Turkey context now, when we say the return migration, immediately the Syrian return migration comes to all the policymakers' mind and also the migration researchers. So this regular return migration from the Europe, especially this is the focus of our research, is it not on the agenda? And when we think of this return migration from Europe, this regular return migration, we think that this is like automatically this is the voluntary mobility, like people live there and then just during the 60s and 70s for the labor migrants, they live there a while, and then especially the first generation, they approach their retirement period and they return back. So that was totally voluntary. But then when we look at the stories, like individual migrant stories, especially for the women, the young women and children, this is not the case. So that's why we need to further dig up the all case-based stories and then look at like how the gender dynamics influence especially the return aspirations, return decisions, and also the return integration, which would be the focus of my talk today. So you'll see the picture of this is a really interesting statue that also is officially opened this summer. We were in Bahadır with Alanur Hoca, Alanur Çavli, and this woman represents this statue, female migrant. It's called is the Journey to Hope. It's the first female migrant from Turkey to Europe. So it's a quite because there are other also statues like this, but they are males. So this is a very important because the first generation of migrants mostly they are males indeed, like women left behind. So then with family reunification, they later join to migration process. And so I will start with the quotation, like the first one, the female, 58 Yozgat, returned from Austria, and she said that we retire. So this is a typical story from the return migration, especially for the first generation. And she said that I went to a psychologist there, and psychologist was Turkish, and he said to me, when you retire, have you ever thought about going to Turkey? And I said, why? He said, because you feel so much better after you come from the Turkey, like especially for the holiday visits. And when you see this quotation, like they retired and they return back. But when we check the details of the story of the woman, you realize that she's a child and early child marriage, and then she went to the she went to Vienna after her marriage, and then she was subjected to especially psychological violence of her grandmother at home, and then there was a tragic story behind that. Since they didn't allow her to go outside, even to visit her hometown, she had chronic depression problems during her migration, during her staying in Vienna. So that's why she has to quit her job because of this depression, and then she retired very early. And then after she returned back to Turkey, her therapy continues, and then also her treatment, but she also couldn't integrate well to do also the Yozgat. So this is like one story, and when we continue, like another one, it's seeming like that the woman, also another young woman, the females, she's also like arranged marriage with her relative, and then she migrated to the Vienna, and then she's indeed was quite skillful a woman. She learned language very quickly, and then she also got her driver's license, and then she set up a cleaning company business in Vienna. But then, unfortunately, her son got sick, one type of thalassemia, and then that's why he needs to medical treatment and he needs to live in a warmer country than Austria. So they decided to return back, but this time that also during this decision making, the mother-in-law and also they have some like problems, like why are you returning, because her wife her husband's whole family lives in Vienna. But so this is like we can say that she also she's a kind of success story. I will return this issue. She set up a cleaning business also in Yozgat, but her daughter, in 15 years old, was born in Vienna and then got education in Vienna, and now she has some mental problems and psychological problems to adjust to the city. So
Hilal,
yeah.
unfortunately, we have about 3 minutes left. So maybe if you can just give us one final example, and I can promise everyone that the presentation will be available afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's why, so then I can focus, like, because since I give these detailed stories as an example, but there are many similar type of stories like this. Who decides at the home this return plans is very important. And mostly our field observations and data show that like males' decision, and then or their preparations that they prepared, and then they also build the consent, especially for the woman, and then to return, and then they prepared, and also males, their families in Yozgat, they make these decisions. And unheard voices here, usually the young females, they had to return back because their family didn't allow to leave them being single in the abroad. So this patriarchal bargaining at home, and then power imbalances between the couples and within the households influences this decision making. So like there is one young woman, again, I will say it quickly. Yeah, she's a third generation. She born in the Netherlands, but that sorry, this is she born in the Netherlands, but then she's a young woman. She has to return back because of the elderly care of the issue of her family, but her brother and then sister, since her big sister was married, stay there, but now she's suffering a little bit from this return, and then she work in a call center in Karaman. So and then like the last thing that I will finish this presentation, like when we look at typical literature on migration, especially from an economics perspective, like the failures, like or whose success or whose failure is an important issue when we think of the return decisions, and especially the women, they lost their jobs, and then they these skills, and then they also lost their that we can discuss for the policy makers, that how can we empower these young females and women, especially for the integration, because they are usually invisible, and then they lost their social capital, as Michal emphasized, all these mobility capitals and social capital, migration capital in some. So this is like they said that they are not forced. There is a last thing that's like there was a conversation between a mother and daughter here that I presented, that indeed she said that the daughter, you didn't ask us like to make this decision to return. So we can discuss it further, and thanks for listening. I'm so sorry that I talked too
No,
much.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Hilal. It's super
It's
tricky to keep these presentations short because there are
yeah.
so many insights. So I want to reassure everyone, we will send out the presentations post this event, and Hilal will be in the chat for the rest of the event, and also we'll find a way afterwards. But moving on to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Hilal. Getting migrants to stay is the real challenge and something we tackle in this project. In the next presentation, Dr. Claudia Streuler from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis will tell us why some regions struggle with retention, even when they offer strong pull factors like we've talked about. So over to you, Claudius.
Thank you so much, Katrine, and thank you all for being here and attending this webinar. It's a great pleasure. And I want to start the presentation with an image. What you can see here is a steel factory in Upper Styria. And looking at this picture, you might ask yourself, who wouldn't like to live and work here? You have like prospering industry, you have mountains, you have nature, and what else? But what is true for this region and for Austria in general is that, and we see the figures that were just recently published now. I'm sorry, I have some problems to get to the next slide. Here. Between 2011 and 23, 2.2 million people immigrated to Austria, whereas in the same period of time, 1.4 million left. And this emigration is like a side of the story that is not often recounted. And if you look at the origin of these people that left, 50% of them were actually European Union citizens. Almost 30% were third country nationals, and only about 20% were Austrians. And if we look at the next slide, you see how this dynamics accelerated, namely from the migrants of working age that came to Austria between 2011 and 2019. By the end of 2023, already 56% of them left, and only 44% stayed. So there is a very, very strong dynamic of like moving onward. And today I want to focus on these questions of like, what are the issues, which problems people are facing, and what are like these dynamics of immigration and onward migration. And I want to especially focus on like the policy level and what policymakers did to kind of tackle this problem. This is the research field. You don't have to take too much care of the numbers. I will explain briefly what it means. So we, and by we, I mean Michal and Inge, my colleagues who did this research on the vulnerability indicator. We looked at regions that have like a high proportion of elderly people, a high proportion of emigration, and a decreasing or like stagnating GDP. And additionally, you see this on the left-hand side, red highlighted. We looked at this like high emigration and immigration dynamics, what I just talked about, a lot of incoming, but a lot of leaving people as well. And that's how we found the two regions where we conducted our research. You see the arrow in the south of Austria, this is Upper Carinthia. And you see the arrow in central Austria, this is Upper Styria, where you just saw the steel factory. And that's where I wanted to focus on. And I will take you to 4 stations of my case study, introduce you to my interlocutors, and also kind of show you their perspectives on the topic. Let's start with 1, promoting your region, welcoming migrants. Exactly because Upper Styria is facing like a lot of vulnerabilities. They founded some 10 years ago a regional management agency that is very much closely linked to the regional government. And if you look at their webpage, don't worry, you don't have to understand German. But if you look at their webpage, you see the image and how they promote their region. Namely, again, you have nature, you have activities in sports like hiking, and you have the industry. That's how they promote their region. And when I asked the person that is responsible for migration management, what are like their biggest achievements to integrate and make people stay, she said, well, I would definitely say an immigration service at the city level that simply needs to exist. It's essential as the first point of contact, and we're trying to create a certain culture of welcome, Willkommenskultur. That means being service-oriented, no matter who comes from which country, with which language, with which challenges, that they receive proper advice and support starting from where they are. So clearly these first points of contact at the communal level was something that worked out very well. However, in a recent study they did, like in a focus group, they found out that newcomers to this region still face a lot of challenges. They miss their migrant diasporas. They have problems to kind of get used to the regional customs and German problems, language problems. Let's go to our second station and see how you could prevent this. Financed by industry, so there is a lot of big steel and technology companies in this region. A recruitment agency was founded, and they recruit firstly health professionals from Colombia, and secondly apprentices from Spain. And when I interviewed the recruitment agent, I asked him about their job, and he said, well, companies come to us and let us know their need for skilled workers or apprentices. So basically we have two options. We either bring in skilled workers or we bring in apprentices. In other words, migration into our vocational training system. And I really believe this is a great system for training and integrating people, because within 3 years you end up with skilled workers in exactly the way you're used to. The only difference is that now they come from Tenerife instead of the neighboring town. And I think some people would disagree, and for them it's a problem that they are not locals, but they're coming from another country. But this is another story that we will face later. So with this requirements profile, we then go to vocational school in Spain or onto job platforms to look for these people. Those who decide to join are given 5 months of intensive German training up to B1 level. That's 5 hours a day. This is still happening in Spain. We then organize the flight, the airport transfer, and together with the companies, we take care of all the issues, contracts, housing, and everything else that comes up. So his solution would be attracting youngsters and kind of train them and start the integration process already in Spain. However, our third station will teach us that coming to a place and having an onboarding in your company, having someone that takes care of the bureaucracy and practical questions, is just simply not enough. I met a young woman from Slovenia who migrated to Upper Styria herself, and she faced a lot of problems when arriving there in these remote areas. She said there are a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of events, but simply you don't see them at the beginning, especially also because things are not advertised in other languages. So learning from her experiences and making a business out of it, she established what she calls a social onboarding agency. And she told me in the interview, our region has a lot of industry and therefore a high demand for qualified professionals. At the same time, though, it's not very attractive for newcomers. And that's exactly the problem I wanted to address. How can we keep the people who already came to Upper Styria? Because too often it happens that employees start working at companies, but then leave again relatively quickly. And with my program, I want to help companies so that when they invest in expensive recruitment and relocation, they also get their return on investment. So she's paid by these big companies, and then she establishes a 12-week social onboarding program for newly arrivals. She says the first 12 weeks are crucial. Every week they meet in like smaller or bigger groups. They do activities like hiking. They talk about regional customs and so on. And this was mentioned by Hilal as well. She has one-on-one psychological support because she said, sorry, I have some, okay. It often happens that life slows down because you don't know what to do with your free time. There's this saying, when it's loud outside, it's quiet inside. And when it's quiet outside, it gets loud inside. What I mean is that the lives of people who move to Upper Styria slow down because they feel at first like there's nothing to do. So what she mentions is that like people coming from bigger countries, from urban areas, from cities, they arrive in these rural areas, and what they experience at first is silence. And this silence added with like not having a support network, not having your friends and family there, can increase mental health issues. With this, I want to come to my last station from the case study. And this is also linked to what Michal's example of like this decision making when people enter school, when the children enter school is linked to. So in interviews with migrants, and I interviewed migrants from Turkey and their descendants, what was most often the answer to why people stayed or moved on was like a life course event. And here especially raising children. My last interview is with a person that came from Turkey to Upper Styria as a 4-year-old. And when I asked him what the difference of his childhood and the one of his children is, he said, they are growing up very well. That was the advantage of staying here, that my children might have more opportunities because of the low proportion of foreigners in the schools here. And that has really proven to be true, because I know a few friends in Vienna who say that young people with a migration background have a very hard time in school. But we don't have that here. Ali is treated the same as Alfred, and Kemal is treated the same as Günther. My son is studying and will soon be finished, and my daughter will graduate from high school soon. So they certainly have very good opportunities. And with this example, I want to come to my 5 final conclusions. So firstly, all researchers and funding agencies, we need more research on this interplay of immigration and emigration / onward migration. Secondly, accessible first points of contact are recommended, especially on a communal level, to have someone here that welcomes you, that helps you with practical issues. But it's not sufficient to have someone that helps you with practical issues or to have an onboarding program for your company, because social onboarding programs are also important, because especially in remote areas, we remember this silent outside and loud inside, psychological problems might appear. Fourth, policies should focus on life cycle events, on like life courses. We know this from migration literature, and especially also in this case study, it became very evident that like life course event, like bringing up children, are crucial for migration decisions, for decisions to stay or to move on. That's why focusing on this programs, on establishing infrastructures for this life course events are very important. And fifth, I just briefly introduced you to some of my interlocutors, but they all don't know each other very well. So mediating between like already existing actors and knowledge, for example, in the fields of industry, policymaking, recruitment or social onboarding agencies, NGOs and migrants themselves is very crucial. And with this, I want to stop and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Claudius. Certainly very interesting to hear these direct quotes describing what it takes to keep them. They will actually tell us. And that's something that is a good thing to also, for policymakers, to get that knowledge. And that's why we are here today. I want to move it over to the debate now and say, now that we've seen these 3 very different perspectives, but connected perspectives, first in Poland, the invisible value of migration capital. Michal talked about trusted networks, language skills, generic skills, which openness to experience, agency, entrepreneurship, these things that stick to the personality and can lead to more openness also to entrepreneurships like food trucks, like we, for example, heard of. And then in Turkey, how power dynamics and obligation shape return. And I think Hilal said it correctly, whose success and whose failures are we looking at in reintegration? And if women are the ones losing out in reintegration, are we truly reintegrating at all? And finally, in Austria, why attracting people isn't the same as keeping them. Claudius brought up some excellent points here. First about the regional strategy, which they will lay out with a lot of marketing and money. But then what the migrants will tell you themselves, which is this need for a local immigration service, advice, support, language training, social onboarding, which was a very interesting point. There needs to be something to do, like Claudio said, especially when an urban person arrives at a more rural region. This brings us to our mini debate. What should regional policy let go of? Because regional policy does bring up a lot of different strategies. This is an ongoing issue throughout Europe, retaining and attracting migrants. I'll be putting a few provocative statements on the table now, and each of our panelists will respond, linking to their casework. Some of the questions are more geared towards certain researchers, and then we'll invite reflections from you throughout in the chat. In the audience, the purpose here isn't actually to agree. It is to sharpen our thinking, our arguments about what migration policy can do and what it can't do, and what myths we might need to release to design better strategies. So the first question, or the first assumption, I might say, if migrants don't stay, maybe they shouldn't have come in the first place. And I will translate this to a question. Does this assumption reflect a failure in attractiveness policy or just the individual freedom of movement? And Claudius, I will pull this question to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, we also heard a lot of like very economic terms when talking about people, and I think it's also important to come to this interplay. But firstly, I think I want to highlight, and this is very crucial, that if you think about attractiveness like policies or policies to attract newcomers, I have to say that like in this political climate that exists, there aren't really strong state or regional policies to attract newcomers. The only policy from a kind of state was like attracting return migrants that already left, and it was in the case of Upper Carinthia. So the state is even the opposite. They're having like a lot of bureaucratic barriers to hinder even like companies to employ third country nationals. So what I could see from the comparison of these two field studies is Upper Carinthia has a lot of like small and medium-sized businesses. So they didn't have the power to attract migrants. However, Upper Styria, the case study I talked about, they have like big companies, and it's the industry, it's the big companies that recruit migrants. It's the big companies that financed this recruitment agency, that financed the social onboarding program. So it's not like the state that attract people, at least for Austria. It's the industry, and they have to kind of do it themselves. And if you don't have a region with big companies, then that can kind of stem this, then you get into troubles. The other side, just very briefly, is this kind of question of free movement. And I think Austria learned, or they should have learned from the guest worker program, because they had like the idea that migration is like a water tap that you can open and close as you want to. But history showed that it's not like that, and mobility and migration are go much more beyond this. And like people just came to Austria because they wanted to end up in Germany, and this will always be the case. And this is like free movement of people. The only thing that you can do is maybe to make it so comfortable and welcoming for these people that they decide to stay in Austria in the end and don't move onward.
Those are super interesting points. The fact that it's not really the states that are sponsoring these policies or that are putting the strong strategies out there. It is in fact the companies. Is there a lot of demand for research into understanding the migrants from the companies, or how do they go about that, understanding what the migrants actually want to come?
Yeah, as I said, like in Upper Carinthia, you have hardly any big companies, so they don't really manage to attract people. They still kind of benefited from this guest worker program where people came, and that's this kind of led to onboard migration or like new migration channels through marriage migration and so on. But I think the companies themselves, and I also made interviews with HR people, they feel also quite left alone from the state to kind of work together with this. So I think industry and companies would be like they would be a very important actor or stakeholder to work together with to kind of maybe understand more what their needs are.
Yeah. A little bit of a provocative question, maybe. Are companies even interested in having migrants stay that long? You talked about retention and all of these strategies to get them there for specific jobs, specific skills and these things. Do they want them to stay? And why might that be a conflict?
Well, I can, and as I said, I conducted interviews with people from Turkey and their descendants. So this was all linked to the guest worker program. And very interestingly, the guest worker program was established due to the industry. Like the workers' council, they were actually against it. So, it's because the industry, they kind of represent the interests of big companies. And if they invest in kind of people that come and if they kind of train them, they want them to stay. So I think they are kind of, even though they would be on the conservative spectrum, if you see it politically, they are still more pro-migration because they actually want the people to stay. But as I said before as well, this is a very economic view on these people, and it goes not really beyond this kind of economic view and considers humanitarian kind of reasons as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it does reflect quite a lot of the economization of the whole migration debate. This kind of like what can we gain from people moving rather than what is the value of people moving, and this is certainly something that that Michal also broadened our perspectives a little bit on, that it isn't just this capital, this skills necessarily. There's also more that to contribute to society. There are some questions coming in here as well about the social onboarding practices, which I find kind of interesting. And Claudius, you of course mentioned the social onboarding of this company that will take care of language training, do social onboarding. You learn about hiking and all these skills. I was wondering actually to throw it a little bit onto Michal, to also ask you, Michal, about this social onboarding, if that's also a strategy you see in Poland. Because as you mentioned, a lot of these migrants will adapt their skills very naturally as they reintegrate. But do you see companies also helping in the reintegration with these social onboarding? It's of course different when it's a return migrant, but do you have a perspective on this?
Only from the perspective, there was a question about kids as well in the chat. Unfortunately, we did not directly work with kids. It's complicated, ethics-wise and so on and so forth. Yeah. Our project was much more general, but I had a couple of instances of reintegration of kids. So you come back, because of this trajectory of your life, of your family life. The kids are, grown up enough to go to preschool, primary school, whatever, and then these kids they have to adapt somehow. And I've heard, I did not talk to the kids obviously, but I work at people's homes and so on and so forth. I've heard comments, I've observed family dynamics, and I particularly well remember a kid who they were like 2 or 3 years after coming back, so very well into back home, let's say. But the kid, he was an early teenager. He basically hated the school, hated the teachers. He interrupted the interview in the meantime, telling the mother, because he overheard what we are talking about, and she was all about, how lovely it is that they came back to their family, region and all that. But the school apparently was unable to contain this or cater to the needs of these kids over there. So I think it's in case of Poland, it's absolutely, completely, totally different to what Claudius just presented. So there is no policy towards return migrants in these regions, no policy towards migrants, or actual migrants who are coming there. So there's not much to discuss really about on social onboarding. It's absolutely hilarious. Although what I found out in the research as well is that some sort of grassroots social onboarding. So people, migrants coming back, to their small villages, for example, they were like, so hey, what I've learned in the Netherlands that in the neighborhood they would build some sort of community. So we have to. So I renovated with my migration money. I renovated some old I don't know, a chapel or former fire brigade, small house, and I would organize, some Christmas parties for the kids and for the village, so there was some sort of integration, let's say, policies brought back home. So again, remitted there, but absolutely nothing on the level of self-government, in my case at least.
Yeah, but isn't that interesting how people see the value of people, right? Like you see this, the social onboarding happening naturally because people are interested in growing their communities and they see new people coming in as an inherent value because of who they are, not because necessarily of the job they have or the money they bring. So I think that in itself is also, quite interesting.
I have one more insight from this perspective. So I talked to a lot of let's say shuttle migrants. So those in the arrangements like 3 weeks here, 3 weeks there, and they told me how it evolved over. They would be in the situation for a decade or 2 decades. How the industries or employers, in Germany, in the Netherlands, would adapt to their humane needs. So they understood after 10 years, for example, that they cannot squeeze the work, the labor out of these folks, but they have to meet somewhere in the middle ground, and it actually pays off. Again, benefits. We hate this language a little bit, being qualitative sociologists or anthropologists, but even our project is sold as benefits of mobility, because we cannot talk about well-being of people. It's not that sexy, but it actually benefited both parties. The guy was able to be with the family more. The company had a happy, trusted, and long time employee, and everybody was happy there. So we have this kind of insights from the field.
No, that's a super good point, Michal. And I think we can say these are intertwined. I think we can say benefits economically have a lot to do with human benefits as well, societal community benefits, because we're also studying internal migration, urban to rural. And so I think it's a matter of time before, communities that aren't already looking at social onboarding will start looking at that. And like you said as well, with these nomads or shuttle migrants, the countries eventually will need to adapt once the competition for either the resources or community building comes, because it's not just the it's not just the companies that want the migrants to stay in these rural areas, it's also the people, because they are losing them. So but super good point, Michal. We will move on to the next assumption, which is to do with this. We only need to attract talent, not understand them. It's exactly what we were just talking about. And the question I want to ask here is, what's lost when policy ignores migrants' lived experiences and who they are as people? And I want to take this over to you, Hilal. Oh, you're muted, Hilal. Oh.
We can continue. Is it
perfect.
fine now?
We hear you. Yes.
Indeed, we can continue to discuss further this issue, like the social onboarding, and also how the policymakers and also migration management policies of both the central government and local governments see these return migrants, and then so for Turkey case, I can say that it is clearly they are invisible. There is no return policies aiming to further reintegrate and make the adaptation of these return migrants fastly to the labor market and also education and also benefits from their capital. So this is very clear. But when we look at the local dynamics and we see that, and also it is was it also on the chat session that like especially for high skilled migrants or also skilled migrants, what we see is that like this killing, as I said during my presentation, for females is very clear from our observations. Like there was a one woman and she got her education in Netherlands for the child care, especially the preschool child care, but then she couldn't use diploma for the equivalence issues in Turkey in order because the education systems are different. Even like having being educated in abroad in Europe is much more prestigious that she couldn't use her diploma. Instead, now she's using her language skills because she speaks more than like 3 languages, and then she works from the home. She has a kid, and it's a more suitable for her to make it more work life or family life balance, and then she works remotely for the call center. She's a young woman. But then she cannot use her like occupation or potential. But on the other hand, if what we also see for the male stats, like especially for the entrepreneurship and also setting up a business, and then as Michal said that look what they learned in the abroad or based on their experiences, observations, also like setting up business, the requirements, official requirements and all the bureaucratic procedures, they have many difficulties in adapting all these processes as well. And so there is also no help, no official assistance or facilitators to encourage them to set up their own businesses. So these are like what we observed. And usually we see that, okay, these are the talents but they, especially the youngsters, they got totally lost because they have now the double language burden because they learned that their first language, for instance, for the Austrian return migrants, their first language is German, and then they try to adapt to Turkish in the education system, and then they got low grades, and then they cannot also adapt to university entrance exams, all these issues, and so that's why they cannot further their education, so they got totally lost, and there is no also support programs for the education and labor market transition for the youngsters. That I can say now just quickly for these issues. So the gender issues are very important for especially the young girls, what they want and how do they adapt and reintegrate them, because all these like they treat it differently, and their families do not allow them to go back. Most of them, their passports, they have seasons for the Netherlands and Austria, so they can go back easily, return back easily and then they can further their education, but their family wouldn't allow them to do this. So, and then when we look at the pets, for after a while they got married, and then all these different issues, dynamics, the family dynamics came into the picture. So
Yeah.
anyway, I will stop there. So
no, these are so many good points, Hilal, but I want to ask a follow-up to that one, because we know that especially women are the ones moving most from the rural areas. That's a universal for most countries. And I want to ask you, do you see splittings of families where there are young girls, women moving away, and then the reintegration is deemed a failure, so to say, but where you see maybe you were saying, and this is the general consensus, that the governments are not setting up these systems. They're not setting up reintegration systems. But are there exceptions to the rules? Are there certain pilot cases or certain towns, municipals, where they see the lost value of either these young women or the older women who are trying to reintegrate? Are there exceptions to the rule?
Yeah, indeed, there are some. There are some women as that I talked about. The woman. I think that was a quite interesting. For the first time, she realized that there's a potential the customers for because all the migrants they come back in the summer, so they have their houses empty whole year, and so it needs to be cleaned and be prepared before they come to. So she opened a business, because she opened a business in Austria, and then she continue her skills and experience in setting up a business. And then what I really liked also, like having a driver's license in her village, she encouraged all her relatives and then women around to get the driver's license. And she is the first one in the town she can drive with the big tractor and also the cars as well. So that was also like empowerment for the woman, like all, because then they also she hires employees, the other women for the cleaning company, and also we also observed that there's the first hotel business opened by a migrant young male return migrant, and also she hires the more women in the hotel and a bakery also. So then these are all, I think, what they observed in the abroad. But still the issue, I should underline the one thing is that, because I was writing also in the chat session, the work norms, employment norms for the host society and origin society is quite different, because here in the rural areas, the males think that, okay, we earned a lot, so they don't have to work. They don't need work. So why do they get employed, or why do they go to set up a business? Because we don't need money. So we had enough money. So that's why the woman got into the private area, the family domain again, the raise children, and then so this is also an issue that the policymakers should consider for the females, like their stories, to reintegrate them, and then they use the capital.
Yeah,
I can say.
I mean, these are you all bring up great examples of return migrants kind of as pioneers of their own reintegration, which is great to hear. You really see these strong examples of them fighting for and especially in your example, to Hilal, other migrants who also, and not even just the migrants reintegrating, but women as a whole throughout that community. Do you see, Hilal, do you see any of these reintegrated migrants going into policy, taking that path? We see a lot of them starting businesses and using their skills for entrepreneurship. Do you see any of them trying to bridge the gap into policy themselves?
Not females, but males.
Yeah,
males.
Yeah.
I see that two examples of the males, that one, but the first one is in, and the Karaman, he was the son of the prior mayors already. So the policy in his family, that's a traditional thing. But then after they returned back from the Netherlands to Karaman, he got a local head, the muhtar, in the village, and then also the other of the village, there's another return migrant. Also, he got a muhtar. So then their relationship, we had really interesting conversation about how his struggles for the village, to develop the village with the local municipality, like, because the policy makers mentality, they have a different, now the mentalities, how do they conflict, and then what new developments bring to his the village. But it is not really we can say that the reintegration policy and adaptation issues for all return migrants, because indeed their identity is not return migrant. Okay, they are gurbetçi, which means that they are the kind of foreign, or they are not really totally accepted, because I can say that they are economically abused a little bit, but still they are part of the community. So there is no need to do something special for them.
Yeah.
But I can say that the females for the policy, even some of them, I encourage to build their own civil society organization or women's cooperative or right-based CCO or something that we talked about it.
Yeah, super good point, Hilal. Michal, you also have a point here.
Yeah, maybe I will jump in.
Yes, please do.
Crazy point here. A lot of conversations I've had in the project with folks who either returned or were in this circular or shuttle arrangements, they were very sad. They achieved a lot of economic success. They sustained their family. They built houses, bought cars, but they were in kind of limbo. They couldn't really come back because of the difference in the wages, or if they came back, sometimes they reflected that it was a little bit too late. They didn't have the time to enjoy their life because they were working as donkeys. This is the quotation from Claudius' research, actually, but it applies to very often to Polish cases as well. So there is this super psychological toll that it's out there, and it's crazy to address to ask for it, but I think it's something that is apparent, that these folks, they need attention in the area of psychological mental well-being. And I'm talking about the Polish regions right now, if we can't ask for any proper migration or return policy, to ask for mental health policy, it would be too much. But this is a serious issue, and I want to highlight it, even though I know it won't be addressed anytime soon, at least here locally.
No, that's a super good point, and yeah, it's a very good point to add on to Hilal's also focus on the family aspects here, and you brought it up yourself, Michal, as well. The kids, yes, we can talk about digital nomads and single workers, but it's a vastly different thing when you're talking about retaining an entire family of a migrant worker or something. So super good point. We're nearing towards the end of the discussion, unfortunately, so I want to give you all a final kind of conclusion round here, because the title of our mini debate is "What should regional policy let go of?" And so far we haven't heard a lot of policies, because as we hear, it is migrants and companies taking up a lot of the slack when it comes to either attracting, retaining, or even strategizing for these migrants. We do, of course, in this project Premium, know of a lot of other examples of regions who really do a lot to attract, retain, and create a community to begin with. But I want to give you a round of what should regional policy maybe not let go of, but what would be your top recommendation for a local region to retain a return migrant? And I want to start with you, Michal.
Yeah, I have a simple message. Again, it's from the Polish perspective. It might not be relevant to many regions like the ones in Austria, for example, but to recognize the process, it would be like super first step. It's multi-layered. Then you have to destigmatize it. There's a lot of stigma. Hilal mentioned it a little bit a moment ago. The mental issues that I've mentioned, and all these other let's say integration issues that are absolutely not addressed, up to these very obvious, awful, economic, dirty, benefits that are, on the table, just to be noticed, recognized. So this is a simple message from me.
Super, thank you, Michal. And then Claudius, you can keep it a bit shorter here towards the end.
Yeah, thank you. I think for the Austrian case, and it would be so interesting to also compare it with other like classical immigration countries. I think Austria is still hesitant to call itself an immigration country. However, it factually is. But that means the whole bureaucracy, all the institutions, school, diplomas, everything is kind of built on this like narrative of all our locals, schools, and so on. I think like changing this narrative and kind of providing this like kind of immigration country resources, networks, and narratives. Kind of, you're coming here and we're building up something together. I think this will change the kind of whole bureaucracy and institutions, but also kind of this feeling for people who come in. I think this is crucial to recognize the fact that Austria has become a country of immigration.
Thanks for that, Claudius. Recognize the problem before you can, and then you can address it after that. It's a super good point. And finally, Hilal.
Yeah, I could say just only say, I think this is very important. The recognition by the local governments, local policymakers is very important, because in Turkey that we know the central government, like migration management policy, more towards the Syrian refugees, irregular migrants, and all these issues, we can understand that. But in local areas, that these migrants should be recognized. Like there should be something special towards them. This can be not. This doesn't have to be like for the local development agency, the like only the economic participation, but also like social participation, or for the like creating and like making an events for the cultural events, just to recognize them with their own identities. Not really like, okay, you are regular Turkish citizens, just you go and we don't care about it. There should be special recognition services for them, that it should be on the local the agenda of the local policymakers. This can be the first step to develop more better reintegration policy for these migrants, I think.
Yeah, super good point, Hilal, to recognize the individuality and also the difference it is when you are returning rather than migrating in the first place, and also diversity of migrant motivations. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of you for this great debate. And thank you to the audience for all the questions. But as we wrap up, let's return to our starting point, these assumptions, because there are a lot of them. Both from policymakers, migrants themselves, companies. Today, we asked our returnees just random, homesick, are they failed migrants who go back, or are they people who carry skills, networks, and experiences that regions can't afford to overlook? Because we think they really can't more and more. And from what we've heard, the answer is that return migration is complex, it's deeply shaped by context, and it's full of untapped potential. So there's a lot to find there. And Premium EU is working on tools to help policymakers act on this complexity, to get to the bottom of it, and to grasp it. We're hard at work on our regional policy dashboard, as you can see coming up here. This tool will give you ways to compare, test, and design smarter migration strategies and policies. We'd love for you to join our Resilient Regions expert group, a network of policymakers and researchers helping us to test and refine this platform. And you can see here on this QR code, if you follow it, we would love to get you involved in this. But yes, I would like to thank you to the speakers, to Sarah and Maria behind the scenes, and thank you to the audience for all of your questions and engagement. There's been a lot throughout, and though we haven't been able to answer all the questions, we will save these questions and we will take them onto our next events, which will be upcoming. So please do use that QR code as well to stay tuned about upcoming webinars, and also you'll get our newsletter and links to our social channels. That's about it for us today, but I will ask you to please stay on for another minute to fill in this poll evaluating our event, so you can help us get better. And yes, please do stay in touch with us. We will send you the recording of this webinar, the slides, and yeah, let us know your thoughts, your questions. We're all ears. And yeah, thank you very much for today. See you next time.